From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Tiger Cats Game Day with Courtney Stephen and Mike Daly.
Welcome to Tiger Cats Game Day, presented by Tiffany Gate Fresh Gourmet on the Ticats Audio Network. The Ticats are headed to BMO Field in Toronto to take on the 11-1 Argonauts and see if they've got what it takes to put a stop to the double blue running all over the CFL. 6 and 7 Ticats are hot right now, and Mike, this one's going to be an exciting game. I feel like the Ticats have so much to prove, and it's getting late in the season. It's almost that time for the playoff push. So, Mike Daly, tell me how this game fits into the course of the Ticats season.
Yeah, well, listen, every time we had went down to play at BMO Field, it was an awesome feeling, right? Because all of Tiger Town came down. You could feel the energy that, all the Ticat fans brought to that stadium. But it was usually on a different case where the Argos weren't 11-1 and the Ticats weren't fighting for their playoff lives. But the nice thing is all those Ticat fans are going to get on that train. And I don't know if you're feeling it right now, Court, but with this Ticats team, there's a little momentum train building as well, right? And the Ticats right now are rolling. And I like the way that they're kind of gelling together. And you know what? It's not a surprise to me because, Court, I'm sure you'd say the same thing, but with Coach O teams, once that gets rolling and that belief starts building up a little bit, it can be pretty dangerous for those other teams that have to play Ticats right now. Taylor Powell's looking really, really good, kind of coming into his own. That defense stepped up big time last game against Winnipeg, right? It was a total team effort, and this is 3-1 in the past 4. I mean, that's what you want. That's the momentum that's building up, and what a test for the Ticats to take on the Argos and see where they stand at the top of the league.
Yeah, coming off a big win against Winnipeg, another worthy opponent. The Ticats are looking at 5 left to close out the season at Toronto today. Then Calgary, Saskatchewan, BC, and Montreal. They control their own destiny to punch a ticket to the playoffs, and potentially they could still host a playoff game at Tim Hortons Field if they play their cards correctly and all things fall into place. So Toronto, on the other hand, they've clinched a playoff berth. They've actually clinched first in the East, if I'm not mistaken. Mathematically, they'd have to let it all completely fall apart, and they'd probably still finish in first in the East. So how does that change their approach to this game? I know that, the Ticats team that you played on in 2000, and was it when we have 15-3?
19, yeah.
You're pushing to get, the best record that a team has had in some time. Are you thinking about resting, or are you thinking about records at that point in time?
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily thinking about the records piece because it all means nothing unless a Grey Cup is won, right? Like, whatever ends up happening in that regular season, it just really doesn't mean anything unless you're hoisting the cup at the end of the season. So, you see the Argos doing something like AJ Ouellette's not going to play this game, right? They say he's going to rest Andrew Harris. He's a little banged up, so they're going to put him on the 6th game. So you're seeing some things kind of trickle down for the Argos that are in the situation. But because they've done so well early on and have clinched first place, at some point they're going to have to get these guys back in, right? Because it's that rest versus rust debate where if you let them rest too much, well, it takes a little bit to get that groove going again. And they're in such a role that, to get a guy like AJ Ouellette back into the lineup before playoff starts, it's going to have to happen to work with Chad Kelly, all those guys. So what you see around the Argos depth chart is a lot of guys are still in there, and you're going to have the starters playing, but I would expect to see them get pulled pretty quickly, whether it's this game, the next one. Get some rest now and then kind of build up that momentum near the end of the season so that once you get into playoffs, you kind of have that rust shaken off at that point. That's what I'm expecting, but hey, I'm not in those rooms, so you just don't know how different coaches will treat this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And just to underscore the fact, Toronto could let this all fall apart. They are 11-1, 5 games remaining for Montreal. If Montreal won all 5, Toronto still has a tiebreaker, so effectively Toronto's clinched that bye in the first week of the playoffs and a home field game in the East Finals. So let's look at their depth chart and see who actually will be showing up today for the Argos. Of course, you've got Chad Kelly, but then the receivers, you got Coxie, DeVaris Daniels, David Ungerer, Brissett, and Johnson. But there is also another interesting character in the Argos wide receiver core that's been making some plays. Tell me about number 81.
Yeah, so Tommy Neal, actually an old McMaster guy right here. Back into my background, if you're watching the screen, old McMaster guy, he stepped in the past 2 games and has been doing unbelievably well. So he's been kind of Chad Kelly's go-to. And in that Montreal game, you would have seen Big 81, big tall kid, getting a lot of the bubble screens, right, to get the ball out quickly, almost like a secondary run play out on the outside, getting the receivers blocking for him, and just first down after first down after first down. So expect to see him come in a little bit and kind of spell out a guy like Curly Gittins, right? And because Curly Gittins has been hurt now, this is second game, and they're just trying to find that Canadian depth behind him. And Tommy Neal just stepped in and doing a really good job. So expect to see him, and the Ticats secondary will have to have some sort of plan for him, because I just don't see them throwing out those the bubble screen plays where the number 3 receiver runs, a little swing route in behind the receivers. I don't see them throwing it out because of how well it worked in Montreal the week before. So something the Ticats defense is going to have to prepare for.
And this Toronto offense, they've had a great season as far as getting the explosive play, finding ways to grab chunks at a time. And with a guy like AJ Ouellette not in the lineup, that definitely changes the dynamic, and we'll see if 24 McMahon can have the same kind of impact. But there's not every runner in the CFL runs behind their pads the way that AJ Ouellette does. So if Toronto, for some reason, is not able to run the ball in the same way that they have up to this point, does that change the outlook of this game? That obviously would have to play into the Ticats' favor.
Yeah, absolutely. And Toronto's rested on this so much, is handing the ball off to AJ Ouellette and even Andrew Harris when he comes in and spells him out. But the one thing to note is that offensive line for the Argos, they're still playing, right? They have Trayvon Tate coming in at the left tackle, so he'll be a new addition there, but he's been around the league a while, so expect it to be, same old for them, but still running behind that same offensive line. So no matter who it is back there, right, there's going to be these plays to be made in the running game for the Argos. And as long as Chad Kelly's in there, they're going to have that dual threat option where, he can hand it off or he can kind of find some receivers downfield. But they are still very explosive, and they're still a very dangerous offense no matter who's running that ball. They'll also have the Canadian Daniel Adeboboye come in, spell off McMahon as well. And he's shown that when he gets in, he can make some things happen too. So it's really no sleeping and walking through the backups for the Ticats here. They got to lock in and go up against this starting offensive line that's been doing a really, really good job. And Chad Kelly's going to be back there throwing the ball around. And listen, when these receivers are out there, especially like a DeVaris Daniels, who just seems to be catching touchdowns left, right, and center, you can't just step into this game thinking the Argos are going to lay down and let you take this win.
Yeah, and let's talk about the people who are going to be defending that Argos offense. On the defensive line, a few subtle changes, more so in the alignment. You have Kongbo and Bennett, who are the designated nationals. And then as the designated Americans, you have Trey Crawford and one Jagarrett Davis, who has been seeing more action in the last week than he's seen in the last 6. So let's talk about this front, which has Malik Carney. Sometimes we can't tell is he an outside linebacker? He got an interception in the last game with like 35 yards after the catch. Quite impressive as an athletic feat. And then, of course, you got Casey Sales and Ted Laurent in the middle, who've been doing a good job of kind of anchoring those A and B gaps all year long. But Jagarrett Davis back in the mix, Trey Crawford, who's been having a very productive season. Is this defensive line finally starting to find their groove? And is Jagarrett Davis going to improve on that, or does he have some catching up to do?
Yeah, I think, there's going to be a little bit of catching up because, like you said, if you haven't played in 6 weeks, it's hard for Jagarrett to come right back in and get in the groove. But the nice thing about Jagarrett Davis is he has this skill, this skill set of rushing the passer, and that just doesn't really go away, right? It's kind of like riding a bike. And what he manages to do is he manages the pass rush very, very well. So him being able to come in and maybe not even be as a starting role, right? Maybe just come in for second and longs, right? Anytime you think there's going to be a passing situation, when Malik Carney gets tired, when Kongbo gets tired, whatever it is, maybe that's a perfect spot for Jagarrett Davis, right? Come in, use that skill set that he has, but then give him a little bit of a break, right? In terms of this whole defensive line rounding itself out, yeah, I think so, right? Like, you've kind of seen what's been going on, especially with Malik Carney with that interception. That was one of the most impressive plays I've seen in a while, right? They blitz from essentially the left side of the offense. He's on the right side end. He takes one step up to hold the offensive tackle so he can't slide over and pick up the blitz, and then sprints to a receiver across the other side of the defense when Zach doesn't even see him at all, throws that thing up there, and to catch, I'll tell you what's impressive the most is that he catches it with his hands. A defensive lineman who is using his hands to pretty much fight all game long, gets those hands out there, nice little triangle with his hands, catch that thing in his hands, and then return it. It was impressive, man. But yeah, this D-line is really rounding out big time for the Ticats defense.
And I think it's one of the things about these guys who come up to the CFL and they play here. The game is built differently than it is in the States. You have to be more athletic. It's more based on space and time, speed, athleticism, instead of just raw power. So a guy like Malik Carney, who has that flexibility, he's a 245 D end. You're not going to play D end in the NFL at 245 very often, but in the CFL, that's prototypical. So he's showing off all of the reasons why he's been a playmaker in this league over the last couple of seasons, with plays like the one he had against Winnipeg, and hopefully he'll continue that trend today. But let's talk about the one and only actual change in and out of the defensive lineup. Richard Leonard is returning to his field corner spot, and he'll be playing next to number 14, Dexter Lawson, who he was brought into the fire very early, and he had to see the likes of Nick Dembski and Dalton Schoen. Those guys welcomed him into his first start with a couple of deep corners, just like you had mentioned they were going to try and attack him with. But you know what? In that second half, they bounced back in the back end, and by the leadership of Stavros Katsantonis, I felt like that back end found a way to tie it together and hold it down. Now, having Richard Leonard back in the fold, that has got to be a big lift for this defensive backfield for the Ticats.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about Richard Leonard a ton, and he deserves it all because what he can do out there, right? That field corner spot, he can now eliminate that side of the field essentially. Right, and he's very savvy. He understands what's going on, right? So he'll be able to help out Lawson for sure. But you're absolutely right. Like, this Ticats defense last game against Winnipeg, and they needed it, right? When you play these top teams like Winnipeg and now Toronto, you need these full, complete team efforts, right? And it really was. The Ticats offense gets out to a hot start, and then the defense comes out there with, a couple turnovers. Stavros played out of his mind, right? Simone, you saw all over the field, right? Malik Carney with that interception. It was a complete team win, right? And when you're playing these top teams, like I said, you need that. And that's what you're going to be looking for again in this game is, can't shoot yourself in the foot. And when those opportunities present themselves, right? And hopefully Lawson gets a few more with a little more experience under his belt. But when those opportunities present, you got to capitalize on them, and that's what's going to end up pulling you on top of some of these really good teams that are top of the CFL.
Let's talk about opportunities and capitalizing on them. A guy like Tyreek McAllister, he's been making big plays on special teams. Of course, he had that long missed point after the touchdown return conversion for 2. That's a guy who flashes on the film, and now in the offensive set, I think it's about time that him and guys like Bayless, Keandre Smith, folks we've seen flashes from them. Maybe this is going to be their chance to start to break out a little bit more. Terry Godwin has come on nicely in the last few weeks, finding his way to the end zone. Tim White has really been exploding and doing exactly what we had expected him to do early in the season. He's really started to shoulder the load from an offensive production standpoint. But I think this offense is kind of taking turns of who's going to be the guy to step up. And especially in these last few games where they've collected a few of their wins. Earlier on in that streak, it was James Butler, who was going over 100 yards, 120 yards rushing, catching the ball. Then Tim White started to step up. There was a game where Terry Godwin had 2 touchdown catches. I'm interested to see how the other guys work their way into the fold, because as Taylor Powell gets more comfortable and confident, he's not afraid to spread the ball around to guys. And as Keandre Smith said in an interview this week, every guy that's lined up here has the skill to beat the person who's lined up against them. Do you feel like this is a balanced offense, or do you think that they really do need one guy to go off each week to have a chance to win?
No, I think, with Taylor Powell, the way he's kind of coming into form here, last game, 5 receivers with multiple catches. 5 last game. That doesn't include a couple that had 1 catch as well, right? James Butler was able to only manage about 86 yards on the ground, which is good, right? And they're feeding him the ball, and you need that because James Butler's one of the best players on this offense, and you need to get him as many touches as you can. But what's impressive about it is Taylor Powell is spreading that ball around. So that makes it very hard for a defense to try to figure out what's going on, because when every single receiver is live on any given play, and live being, on defense, you kind of game plan, you start tracking who's getting targets, who's not getting targets. If there's 3 receivers to the short side of the field and 2 to the field side, well, where are they throwing it more times? 80% they're going to the 2 receiver side. So these guys aren't really going to get the ball much, right?
Decoys.
But yeah, exactly. All decoy routes, right? And usually you see that with the most outside receivers, sometimes decoy routes, blocking receivers type thing, but not with this offense. With this offense, he's spreading the ball around so well that you can't really hone in on 1 or 2 guys. Yeah, sure, Tim White's going to have a couple explosive games like he does, but Keandre is exactly right, and he showed you with that catch that he had last week, right? Huge first down where he just goes up and over top of the DB, and Taylor Powell gives him a shot, gives any one of these receivers a shot, and they're gonna come down with the ball. But the biggest thing is, you mentioned Tyreek McAllister, and Court, I know you'll like this because you're a fan of this guy, but Sean Thomas Erlington takes a little bit of that weight off of a guy like Tyreek McAllister, right? So now you have these 2 essentially tweeners where they're kind of these running backs, explosive type receivers, right? Can get that yak yard, make people miss, right? But now Sean Thomas Erlington, I'd like to see him get a little more involved into the offense, because we've been saying it for a couple of years now. Every time he touches that ball, good things happen for the Ticats. So he's kind of that extra little Swiss Army knife that, they can find a new and fun way to use.
Yeah, and he also has been instrumental in the last few games in helping to protect Taylor Powell. One of the changes in this offense has been Joel Figueroa. He is not going to be in the lineup tonight. You got Jordan Murray moving over to the left tackle, Tyrone Riley coming in at the right tackle. But when asked earlier this week who was the most improved offensive lineman, Coach O said it was, Coulter Wood-Manzi has really been coming on. And then next to David Beard and Revenberg, I mean, this offensive line, though you're missing Big Fig, which is one of the best offensive linemen in the CFL, one of the highest paid linemen in the CFL, you have 5 bona fide guys up front with backs in the backfield who know how to identify blitzes and then pick up pressure to give Powell a protected pocket, somewhere safe to throw the ball from. And I think we can't overlook that quality, because without those running backs to kind of pick up those late blitzers or those wrappers who are coming around the edge, I don't think that Taylor Powell has the same kind of productivity that he's been having. Of course, it's a team game, but I feel like we got to give our flowers to the running backs in their pass protection, especially as of late, because they've been stepping up and really helping this offense have a chance to breathe and deliver and throw the ball on first and key second downs.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely with you, right? And what better opportunity than this week when you go up against this Argos defense, right? Like, you look at their defensive line, and it's one of the best in the league right now, right? You got Flo Orimolade over on the end, and he is playing lights out. It's one of those matchup nightmares that we talk about where you can't really leave them on a one-on-one situation, right? So what better way than those backs, checking some of the backers to make sure none of them are blitzing, but now have a called chip play where that back is there in beside Taylor Powell, pass play happens, and he goes and helps Jordan Murray chip flow to slow him down, right? To give Taylor Powell a little more time in the pocket. And when you do these chip blocks and chip kind of from outside in, you bring that defensive lineman closer to the big offensive lineman who just wants to get his hands on him, right? That's all he wants to do is be able to latch those big hands on him, and then it's going to be a long night for him. So look for some of these backs like Sean Thomas-Erlington, James Butler, those type of guys to come in there and chip some of these ends, because this Argos defensive line is no joke. 6 sacks last week against Montreal, and they lead the league in sacks right now. So it's going to be quite the test for that offensive line that's been rounding out.
Well, we always talk about games are a matter of not beating yourself, not having a excessive amount of turnovers, and field position. Now, field position changes when you have negative yardage plays, but you were telling me before we hit the red button and turn this thing on that the Argos are among the best in the league at all of the above. Protecting the quarterback, getting to the quarterback, getting the ball, keeping the ball. So what's the key to undoing that formula that's been working so well for them?
Well, if you got the answer, Court, I'd love to hear it. But I think the best thing you can do is it all starts with protecting that football. The turnovers are what's going to end up undoing an offense, right? Undoing a team, essentially. And we saw it last week with the Ticats, right? Got a couple turnovers against Winnipeg early. They were managed to put some scores up nice and quick, right? Start fast. But I think at the end of the day is when you can protect that ball, which Taylor Powell and James Butler and crew are doing very, very well. That's the most important, because then you at least get to kick the ball downfield, right? If you're not able to get into field goal range or get a touchdown, you at least get to flip that field position battle, right? So you limit the turnovers, you get to keep that field position going. But that being said, when the Argos get the most sacks and they protect the quarterback the best, it is going to be a long, long night to try to figure out how to get to Chad Kelly nice and quick, and that might be some disguised blitzes, something like that, just trying to time it up well. And then using that chip from the running backs, right? Maybe a little added protection and limit the receivers that are going downfield in routes so that you have Taylor Powell to give him a little bit more time, and maybe have like a 2 or a 3-man route combination where it's an easy read, get that ball out quick, and then just play essentially one side of the field so that you can have protectors on the backside.
So let me ask you this now. We're talking about offense, defense, both sides of the ball. Who is really a great matchup for us to watch in this one? Because there's guys who are in the lineup that aren't usually in the lineup for both teams. But, at this point in the year, everybody pretty much is who they're going to be. No, I think you've had a chance to learn. You've had a chance to build your chemistry. We know who the go-to guys are. So in this one, where is there going to be a key matchup that the fans should be looking out for?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to go, we talked offense, we talked defense, but when you look at really what's making this Argos team roll, is it's a guy by the name of Javon Leake, right? He's got 4 punt return touchdowns. Right now, the Argos, and we talk about, Corey, you brought it up perfectly. It's almost like we've done this show a couple times. You set it up absolutely perfectly. Field position is everything, right? Field position is everything, and protecting the ball. The Argos right now are averaging, Court, on punt return, 15 yards per punt return. That is massive. Usually a pretty good average on punt return is about anywhere from 7 to 10 being pretty high, right? You get a little 5-yard halo, so you could imagine that gives you, a free essentially 4 or 5 yards. But anything more than that is doing well if you can get up to that 10. The Argos are averaging 15 yards. I haven't seen that in a very long time, and that's what's helping this Argos offense and defense, frankly, win a lot of these games and be able to protect the ball, because every time that Javon Leake touches that ball, he has a chance to go to the house or at least get a couple first downs for this offense so that they're in scoring position and they can now be a little more protective with that ball and not have to stress it downfield, whatever it might be. So Javon Leake is one of these matchup guys that you're going to have to really pay attention to, right? Because he's really what's kind of making this whole Argos team roll right now.
Yeah, and I think he's shown time and time again that he can do it on his own if it comes down to it, which is dangerous, and caution to the people who have to go out there on special teams and tackle that guy. Break down, come to balance, whatever technique you want to use, just make sure that you use it and get that man out of bounds. I'm thinking about a different matchup, though, because the Argos have been so proficient with the big plays. I'm looking at one of their big receivers, DeMonte Coxey, 6'3", 200 pounds. He plays the X receiver, which is typically the guy who you go to in the clutch, versus Kenneth George Jr., who is playing the boundary corner, one of the hardest positions in football. Now, DeMonte Coxey, he's got 4 touchdowns on the year, but the stat that stands out the most to me, 19.5 yards per catch is what he's averaging. So this guy on 28 receptions has 545 yards. That means he only makes big plays. He really only makes big plays, and I think you have to account for somebody like that in key situations. So when it is second and long, when it is red zone, you got to make sure that it's body to body. You're doing your technique perfectly, man turn, play through the hands, be aggressive through the finish, and you know, if you can get a hat on the ball when he's falling down, maybe you can force a fumble or just get to him a little bit psychologically, because he is a gamer. Coxey is a gamer, and Kenneth George Jr. is going to have a full day's work going up against him. So that's a matchup that I'm looking forward to, and I will be highlighting when I'm watching the game later on. Any individual people that we haven't spoken about that you think are noteworthy that folks should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think Chris Edwards, right? Chris Edwards, I want to see him kind of appear onto the scene. I know he was in Argo last year, so it's going to be one of those things where you always get up for the team you're going to play against next, or the team that you were on before. But there's a pretty good Sam linebacker matchup in this game, right? So Chris Edwards, I want to see him pop. We've been talking about this. He's a big play DB back there, right? And I just haven't really seen him show up a ton as of recent. So, and I know he has it in him, but when you talk about playing this full team game, it's defense getting some turnovers, and that's what he has shown in the past that he's been. But a Darius Pickett on the other side, these are two guys that can really affect a game in, game out, right? Last game you saw Darius Pickett get that sack to seal the win for the Argos really late. And I'm looking for Chris Edwards to do something similar, whether it's a sack, right? Whether it's a couple big tackles in the backfield on a blitz where he's kind of folding in behind some of those D linemen, the offensive line can't see him, and so all of a sudden, boom, he's in the backfield. Couple tackle for losses, stuff like that to make it into a second and long. Just hit for him to show up making these big splash plays, because Ticat fans have gotten accustomed to it early on in the season, but down the stretch, we're really going to need a guy like Chris Edwards to be able to step up to make some of these plays. So that's kind of where my eyes are going to be, is on that Chris Edwards, but also on that Sam linebacker battle, because he's just involved in so much throughout the game.
Yeah, and I think the guy right next to him, Jameer Thurman, he's also a playmaker who's had some great flashes this year, and he's been relatively consistent, but in a game where the starting running back for the opposing team is not in the lineup, I think that whoever finds their way between the tackles against Jameer Thurman, I want number 6. I want him to punish that running back, and I want him to assert himself as a great player that he is. Not to say that he hasn't, but I think there's a phenomenal opportunity for him to really rack up some tackles, make some plays in the backfield, and just show off why he is one of the best numbers and numbers linebackers in this game. And of course, This game is happening 7 p.m. at BMO Field in Toronto. It is the 6-7 Ticats looking to go 500 against the 11-1 Toronto Argonauts, who've already locked up first spot in the East for the rest of this season. And now it's the Ticats' turn to do their job and punch a ticket to the playoffs. So if you're not going to make the trip down that Lakeshore West line and get off an exhibition and head into BMO Field, then you know what to do. You tune in at listen.ticats.ca. And if you've been tuning in all season long, we appreciate it. Make sure that everybody hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you on, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Make sure you subscribe and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5 stars because it helps us find more Ticats fans out there. So for Mike Daly, this is Courtney Stephen for Tiger Cats Game Day, presented by Tiffany Gate Fresh Gourmet on the Ticats Audio Network. And until next week, we hope you have a great game day.
It's game day and you're ready. So are we. Let us know your thoughts. Email us at gameday@ticats.ca. Courtney Stephen and Mike Daly are here every game day with their insights into today's game. Subscribe to the Ticats Audio Network on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.